and we appreciate the opportunity to come and have a discussion with regard to the City of New Haven's plan that we have been working on for the last 2 years, which entails meeting an existing need that the department and the city currently have with paramedics. This plan has actually started under the leadership of Chief Alan Wright and also Assistant Chief Matt Marcarelli, and then when Chief Wright had retired again, Chief Ralph Black came on board. And so we have been working this plan for essentially pretty close to 2 years. And it was based on a research analysis that we did that was conducted in my office. And it was conducted to show the amount of calls that the city does in medical and fire as well. And some of the documents that you'll see here, and again, I'm sorry that I can't show it to you on the computer here, it's not working. But this kind of just went through every piece of apparatus in the city. It looked at how many calls they went on for fire calls, how many calls they went on for emergency medical calls, and how many calls they went on for other incidents. So that's some of the documents here. What I want to cover is, I'm going to hand out a couple of documents as well. First, I'm going to hand out, you can take one of these, everyone, that'd be great. That's right.
Oh, I'm sorry. They're not all for you.
Take one.
You know, I know there's a lot of documents here, but I think it's important that we look at each of the documents and kind of just go over them quickly. This is an application that the city submitted to the Federal Emergency Management Agency under the Assistance to Firefighters Grant. And why this is critically important is to provide an understanding of what we told the federal government we were doing with this plan. And if I could just real quickly go over to page 16 of 28. And this was submitted to the federal government in December of 2015. And it really describes, in less than 4,000 characters, a project description. And the project description is very carefully articulated here. It was written by myself, an Assistant Chief of Operations at the New England Fire Department, Matthew Marcarelli. And if you look at the first page that I had said, it's page 16, it talks about the project description. And this was actually for a new rescue vehicle, which will come into play as I get into the presentation and the analysis that's sitting in front of me. But what's important here is we actually requested $900,000 to purchase a new heavy-duty rescue. And that rescue is going to be an important component of what you see in this plan because it actually replaces one of the existing squad companies that we're talking about. And if you look, let's just go over to page 17 and start at the top. And again, I just want to read a little bit of it. This heavy rescue will be a storehouse for all rescue tools and equipment currently carried on multiple satellite vehicles and trailers in our fleet. This heavy rescue will have the ability to carry shoring equipment, trench panels, high-angle rescue equipment, braking and breaching equipment, vehicle extrication, structural collapse, and hazardous materials response equipment. The vehicle will be equipped, plumbed to have reels and carry and deploy hydraulic rescue tools from the front and side of a vehicle. It will have enough room to carry a Stanley power system and all its accessories. The vehicle will be supplied with an air compressor of 300 CFM. It will also have sufficient room to carry 6 firefighters. The vehicle will have the ability to respond to other jurisdictions for mutual and automatic aid in technical rescue incidents. neighboring departments currently do not have a lot of these capabilities. The vehicle would be a non-walk-through to maximize compartment space. The big thing is here, if you look at the second paragraph, the plan for implementing this project begins with the consolidation of needs. We currently have two tactical engine companies, that's Squad 1 and Squad 2, which you've so much heard about. These companies train multiple firefighters to man these two units instead of training and staffing two engine companies. We will centrally locate this proposed rescue to respond to incidents citywide. The equipment on the two existing apparatus will be consolidated into this new rescue. The trained personnel from one of the existing companies will be redeployed to meet an existing need for additional paramedic units for medical response. In 2014, there were about 2,000 incidents that we consider hazardous, motor vehicle accidents, extrications, and so on. That rescue could have been utilized in 2013 for about 2,100 incidents. The city and fire department will be saving money by staffing 5 positions on this rescue, currently to what's staffed on Squad 1. A decrease in expenditures will be reflected in decreasing training hours for 5 firefighters at approximately a cost of $60,000 per year. We have received information from 2 apparatus dealers that this will be about a $900,000 apparatus. I think this is very important, and then when we get down to the benefit of this community of this project is relative to the cost is overwhelming within the city of New Haven, benefiting on dual fronts by consolidating 2 engines, which are Squad 1 and Squad 2, into one. It will release an engine for use in providing ALS to the entire community. We have about 13,000 paramedic or advanced life support calls each year citywide. This volume of calls has remained steady over the past 3 years. It will allow us to be able to respond to more calls while receiving revenue for transport. The city will also save money on training personnel, not having to train for rescue discipline training, utilizing 1 vehicle for heavy rescue, and reduce depreciation, maintenance, and fuel costs on the second vehicle. The city has completed research on the cost of maintaining 1 engine, and resulting cost to operate an engine is $99,000 per year. That actually does not include the depreciation. The depreciation steps it up to about $650,000 and then start adding in some additional costs. So again, I wanted to bring this to your attention because this is a plan that's being worked on, and it has been being worked on through starting with Chief Wright, Assistant Chief of Operations Matt Marcarelli, myself, and Chief Ralph Black as well. So I think that's important because when we get into the presentation here, you'll have a better understanding of where we're coming from. The next thing I want to have you look at is the agreement between the City of New Haven and the New Haven Fire Union Local 825. If you go down to section 37.3, the fire chief shall have the right to redeploy the personnel from one engine company only for the purposes of staffing 2 additional ALS units, staffed with no less than 2 firefighting employees per unit. I think that's critical because everything that we're doing had to meet the existing contract language. And I think that's a critical component. It's very important to know that everything that we looked at in the collective bargaining agreement, this was the easiest thing for the city to obtain. With that said, I want to move over to the current deployment analysis that you currently see today in the city of New Haven. These red dots, each of these red dots represents the fire engine that's stationed at each of the stations. Engine 15 is here, there's a red dot. Engine 9 is here, engine 11, engine 6, engine 4, and throughout the city. The numbers in each of these red dots reflect the amount of medical calls each of those engines go on. So let's use engine 9 for an example because that's a question here. Engine 9 responds in 2015 to 2,326 medical calls. Going over to the green dots. The green dots today represent a paramedic unit. One of those paramedic units has just become a transport ambulance. One of them is stationed to cover the east side of the city. and one covers the west side of the city. So those two green dots are paramedic units, one at Engine 5 on Woodward Avenue, one at Engine 11 on Howard Avenue. If you look at those numbers represent how many medical calls those units responded on. So they went on 7,270 calls, emergency 2, emergency 1 did 6,104. And if you look at the total number, the city of New Haven did 18,789 medical calls last year. That does not include a total of 14,000 calls that our 911 center, through the triage system, or it's called Emergency Medical Dispatch Protocols, or EMD, they determined those to be lower priority, and AMR went on that call by themselves. We used to go on all those calls, but that was changed in 2004 from a total of, we used to do, believe it or not, 32,000 calls a year. We're now down to approximately 25,000 calls, but that's because AMR is going on those calls by themselves with no assistance from the New Haven Fire Department.
Can you give an example of what that type of call would be?
Sure. So a 911 call comes in for a person who fell, and they fell and they said, I think I broke my arm, and they'll ask them a set of questions. If it's the first person who's calling that is requesting the ambulance, are you breathing okay? Do you have any chest pain? Do you have any difficulty breathing? No, 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 no. The call then gets transferred over to AMR, and the New Haven Fire Department does not respond on that call. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to now get to the yellow dots. The yellow dots are what we call squad companies. And this is Squad Company 2. Squad Company 2 is an engine company as well. It serves as a heavy-duty engine that has response capabilities for technical rescue, high-angle rescue, trench collapses, things like that. So each of these units respond to those calls throughout the year. But if you look, they also responded on, in 2015, 782 medical calls, 644 medical calls. Some of those happen to be car accidents because a car accident comes in as a medical call, the way it's dispatched through the National Incident Reporting System. It's coded as a 300 call, so those numbers include that. So when you look at these two numbers, these 2,300 and 700, just that station at Engine 9 is responding to 3,000 medical calls a year. So we said, what can we do? We need paramedic units, and we need paramedic ambulances, and we don't have them. We're counting on mutual aid from many other communities, in many cases, to come and transport patients from the city of New Haven. I'll point you to the document that says MedCom, and if you look, every month, and I did this is 2016, January to current August. If you look at New Haven, that's the amount of calls that we needed mutual aid to transport a patient to the hospital from another community. So if you look, we utilized Nelson Ambulance 7 times and West Haven Fire Department's ambulance 5 times. If you go down to March, where we had 10 of those, we used Nelson Ambulance 7 times, West Haven Fire Department 3 times. If you go to March, okay, and I think it's important to note that we used Hunter's Ambulance out of Meriden, out of Wallingford, to come and transport our people. And then if you go down, you look at Nelson Ambulance 6 times, North Branford Ambulance came into New Haven to transport, and then West Haven Ambulance. And if you look at it, every month it ranges between 10 and 15. If you go to April, same thing, you'll see that we're using Nelson Ambulance, West Haven Fire Department again. In May, we used the Branford Fire Department, Nelson Ambulance and North Branford Fire Department. And as you go on, you'll see the numbers getting a little bit higher, especially July. July was a busy month. We had 18 times we had to get assistance from other communities. And if you look at that, Hunter's Ambulance 3, Nelson Ambulance 6, North Branford Ambulance 1, and West Haven 6. Those are important numbers because we're asking people to come from other towns to handle our calls because we don't have enough paramedic units. So what we did is, and it's an immediate need, it's an immediate need. If you take a look at both of these paramedic units, they're doing 7,000 calls a year. That's a lot of calls, okay? And each of these cover one side of the city. If this unit happens to be out and someone's having a heart attack in Engine 9's area, they have to wait for a paramedic unit to come all the way from Woodward Avenue. Now, it doesn't make a difference unless it's one of your parents that's laying there. And everybody's kind of saying, where's the paramedic unit? Where's the paramedic unit? If the ambulance doesn't have one, in many cases they don't, we ride in the back of their ambulances, you're waiting a long time for that paramedic in the critical call. And again, they represent each half of the city. Any questions on this map before I go to what the research analysis took us to?
Well, I have a sort of a basic question from
Yes, sir.
one of the other things is, if you're going from 2 units to 1, doesn't that make it more difficult to cover the geographic size of the city?
Well, we're going from 2 to 4.
2 to 4.
The one is the specialized
Yeah.
truck. That they're going.
Yeah, so let me hit this one, and then maybe the question might be answered, and then if not, we can answer the question. So if you look at our research deployment analysis, this was the plan that we thought would work best because, number one, it coincides with the collective bargaining agreement, and with the amount of calls that we're doing, we would split the city into 4 different areas. So those 4 paramedic units would be located Emergency 1 out at Woodward Avenue, Emergency 2 at Engine 11 on Howard Avenue, Emergency 3 at Ellsworth Avenue, and Emergency 4 at the Whitney Avenue station. So this kind of splits the city into 4. These black lines mean nothing more than districts. They're not drawn through any particular area. It just means they're cutting the city into 4 pieces. So this emergency unit would have a much smaller area to cover. This emergency unit, a smaller area to cover. Same thing here, same thing here. So we'd be splitting the calls from 2, 7,000 and 6,000, to each of these covering 3,700, 3,700, 3,700, and 3,700. Okay? And remember, at least 3 of them would be paramedic ambulances. At least 3, and very possibly 4. If you look at the red dots represent engine companies. So take, for example, Engine 9. Here's an engine there, okay? What we did was we took the squad that was here and we consolidated those 2 units into 1, which would be at the Whitney Avenue station. It would be 1 heavy-duty rescue, as we put in a grant for, as we talk about the need to have 1 unit that would respond citywide. And it's only those technical incidents, the motor vehicle accidents. If there's a motor vehicle accident, let's just say over in Engine 9's area, it's going to be Engine 9, Emergency 3, and the squad unit, because if it involves extrication, you'll need that extra equipment. So if you look how we break this down, we kind of distribute the workload much more evenly than it is here. So if someone's having a heart attack up in Engine 9's area and Emergency 2 or Emergency 4 is out, there's an emergency unit here. So we're getting more coverage into equal parts of the city. So it's more of a more community approach.
So what you're putting is a new paramedic unit at Ellsworth?
Correct, a paramedic ambulance.
Ambulance.
Correct.
Okay. And you said something about these new units, 3 of them would have paramedics, but maybe...
All 4 would have paramedics.
They would.
3 of them would be ambulances.
Oh.
And right now, we're running with 1 ambulance that we just put online, a brand new ambulance, literally a week ago. We had none. There was no ambulances in New Haven. We had 1, was in a motor vehicle accident back in the beginning of the year. It hadn't been put in service. We bought a brand new one. So that's the only ambulance that we have in operation today. So we have 1 ambulance today here, and that's the only one. This is a paramedic unit. This just spreads out the workload. And if you look at the numbers here, this was based on an 80-20% analysis. So we said that the emergency units would respond on 80% of the medical calls. Not on 100%, but we did 80-20. Now, the fire chief, when he comes in, he can say, look, I want to do 60-40. I want to have the paramedic units going on 60% of the calls and the engines going on 40% of the calls. But that's something that the chief who comes here will have to look at tweaking the plan, maybe augmenting it differently. But the way we have it here, each of these engine companies will still go on a call. If it comes in as a very serious medical call and it's a cardiac arrest, you're going to get an engine and an emergency unit and an ambulance. Yes?
I am sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask you, because I think this needs to be clarified during this part of the conversation.
Yes.
I'm going to read you directly from a document that was given to us by the New Haven Fire Union.
Yes.
Okay. Quote, Rick Fontana showed the fire department union a plan to take Engine 9 out of service. That's a quote. And then there's some information about why that would be negative. He goes on to say later, Fontana's plan is to replace Engine 9 with a non-firefighting emergency unit that would be a regular citywide resource. His plan also calls for a reduction in medical response by your engine in every neighborhood in the city. So what I'm wondering is that correct? And if not, could you clarify
Sure.
specifically what happens to Engine 9? And I think one of the issues here is there's and correct me if I'm wrong, but having heard two of these things now, there's an Engine 9 company, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But there's also an Engine 9 that's an actual firefighting apparatus, and it's called Engine 9. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So there's more than one Engine 9 in that.
Well,
So could you
let's-
clarify
so
all that in
it's-
terms of the city plan?
Yeah, so a portion of that is correct. Let's just look at Engine 9 today. So Engine 9 today has a fire engine and also has a squad unit. Okay, and a squad is also an engine.
And so it has, Engine 9 at Ellsworth
Correct.
has a fire apparatus that's
What?
called Engine 9 too.
Correct.
Because the apparatus is actually called that, and it has the squad.
Yes.
Okay, but that squad vehicle is not called Engine 9, it's called Squad 1 or Squad 2.
Squad 2. Very good.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank
So
you.
Squad 2, when you look at this, so Squad 2 was sitting here. Squad 2 is now combined into one squad. It's now at the Whitney Station. So it's consolidated so Squad 2 is consolidated into Squad 1. The manpower from Squad 2 goes to Squad 1, okay? So this is a five person squad. Here, there's 4 people. So what would essentially happen is, as the contract says, the fire chief would redeploy the firefighters from Engine 9 into 2 paramedic units. And the 4 guys that were on Squad 2 would then man Engine 9. So it's essentially you're combining 2 squads to one, and Engine 9 is still here. A paramedic unit is now there. A battalion chief's unit is now there. I'm not really sure where you get a reduction in response time, because every station has 1 engine. Every station is the exact same. 10 fire stations, 10 fire engines. Every station is fully covered. 4 paramedic units throughout the city. If this unit is out and a paramedic unit call comes in here, okay, and this unit is not in the station, the engine would go. So we're kind of splitting hairs on what engines would go where. It's based on how the call comes into the 911 center. The 911 center is a triage, emergency medical dispatch, standard protocols, and if a call comes in and it sounds based on what the person on the other end is telling them, they'll send the appropriate response, whether it is just a paramedic unit, or if it sounds more severe, it would be the paramedic and engine. That's where these additional numbers come from. And if this unit, I'm going to use this because this is far from everything, engine 16, although we have 59 medical calls there, we anticipate that unit to go on every medical call in the district, because it's a long way out. But we used an 80-20 deployment analysis. We couldn't say it would be, this engine would go 100% of the time, and this one would go 60. We did an 80-20, because we think in most cases, 4 of these units, when the system is surging, will all be out, and a fire engine might be out on 5 medical calls. But today, what you're getting is, you might have 5 medical calls that are being attended to by 5 engines, and then you get a fire. So this plan makes each of these fire companies more readily available to go to a fire. Right now, they're tied up on medical calls all day. We do 75% of our calls are emergency medical services. And this plan best answers the needs of the community. It's an immediate need. We hired 20 paramedics that are going through their background checks right now. We've purchased an additional ambulance and an additional paramedic unit to make way for this. A lot has gone into it.
Can you explain to me the difference between a paramedic unit and an ambulance? I'm sorry if everyone knows that, but I don't.
Sure. A paramedic unit is a non-transport, so it would be a Suburban. Be 2 people in a Suburban, one of them.
SUV?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. So that would be a paramedic unit. Right now, we have a pickup truck, a converted pickup truck, that's 1 paramedic unit, and also an ambulance that's here at Emergency 1, that's a full ambulance. And we think, by doing this, we're utilizing smaller, more versatile, smaller vehicles that are a lot easier to get around in the streets, that are not sending a $750,000 fire truck on a basic call. And it's all determined in the 911 center. And I've heard people say, well, you know, if people are excited and they don't really tell you what's going on, that happens. It happens all the time. It happens with a fire too. Someone could say, hey, there's flames on the back porch, and you roll 7 or 8 pieces of apparatus, and guess what it is? Someone's cooking on a grill and a flame came up. That happens. It could happen with a medical call as well, but that's why we ask very specific questions based on a regional protocol. This is not just in New Haven. This is all of the region. They all respond with paramedic units if they have them. End of story. Yes.
So people in the 911 center are telling fire companies in the city where to go and who should go.
Correct.
Why isn't somebody who is part of the fire department deciding where the fire equipment should go?
Well, it's based, again, these are all based on standard operating procedures. So they're based on the procedures that are set forth in the communication center, but those are built with the fire department. So in the 911 center, we have dispatchers and we have call takers. So there are no fire personnel or police personnel in the dispatch center. It's all based on the way the calls come in and the way they're dispatched based on standard operating procedures that are set forth by either PowerPhone or by the Academy of Emergency Medical Dispatchers. So those are the 2 people that have protocols that are accepted by the medical director that oversees the New Haven Fire Department for EMS response.
So the paramedics go out and they're the ones who determine whether an ambulance is needed to take people to...
They all go together. So when a call comes in...
There's only 1 ambulance.
Correct.
What if you have five paramedic calls? In other words, there's 1 ambulance, right? And
Yes, sir. There's one, so right now, one of these, this is the only ambulance.
Right.
We expect to put at least 2 more and possibly 3 more into place.
They were calling another, an
And
actual
that's right,
ambulance company.
that's how we get into the mutual aid, that's when.
So-
And the other question I have is, how many times we request outside service? How many times are we requested to go to West Haven, Branford, and so forth and so on to supply assistance?
Never.
Never.
Why, because they have enough? I mean, they essentially have enough of their own units.
We don't ever go to another town for a mutual aid medical call, ever.
Well, you don't have ambulances until now, so you wouldn't go.
Right, but if you look at the numbers, those towns have many of their own. That's our problem. We have an immediate need. And let me just flow you through, a 911 call comes in for 200 Orange Street for a report of someone having chest pain. Today, that call comes in, person sitting in a chair saying, I'm having chest pain. We send a fire engine with 4 people, a paramedic unit, or an ambulance from the fire department. It's a paramedic unit with 2 people, so that's 6, and then AMR for 2. So that's 8 people. Person having chest pain. We think that it could be much more efficient. We can provide a quicker level of care because there'll be multiple paramedic units throughout the city. That's why the engines are going, because there's only 2. By increasing to 4, they're more strategically located, and we don't have to send all of those people all of the time.
What if they're on the 4th floor and have to be carried down, and you send fewer people, and you have to then wait for another squad to arrive, or another
No,
truck to arrive, or something like that? No.
So in most cases, the ambulance, American Medical Response, they carry the people down the stairs. If you're carrying somebody down the stairs, you can only do it with 2 people.
But if we have our own ambulance, why do we need ambulance?
Because they hold the primary service area response for an ambulance. So they own that area based on the history of the ambulances within West Haven, New Haven, North Haven, Hamden, East Haven. They own those licenses. The only time that we transport is when they're not readily available to respond. And when the system is surging, and it happens all the time, when the hospital gets busy, so is the ambulances. And sometimes they can't provide a transport unit because they're busy. So rather than to be waiting for another city to come, and believe me, when you're waiting and it's a true emergency, you can't take them in a fire truck. You can only take them in an ambulance.
Pickup truck, right?
Can't take them in a pickup, can't do that. I think the only time we've done that in the past many years is we had somebody transported in a payloader during Storm Nemo. And under extenuating circumstances, that was done. But the governor gave a, kind of relaxed the protocol or the standard of an ambulance for that big storm because we couldn't get ambulances there. But you can never, in a normal, everyday scenario, got to be in an ambulance.
Can I just go back to the personnel?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So an engine 9, the squad, which essentially can act like an engine because it has water, right? It has water and a pump.
It is an engine,
It
yes.
is an engine, but also the people on it have specialized training for rescue.
Correct.
Essentially, right? That's the squad. So how many people are in that? That's 4?
So-
4?
So Squad 2 has 4,
Okay,
Squad 1 has 5.
right, okay. So now instead, you will have a paramedic unit there. So the 4 people that were on the squad, where do they go, or do they stay there?
No, the 4 people that were on the squad, they're actually getting reassigned to the engine because the way the contract says, and if you adhere to the contract, and again, splitting hairs, the contract says the fire chief shall have the right to redeploy personnel from an engine company into 2 ALS units. Now, they want to argue that point, can argue it in Hartford, but the fact of the matter is, it's in that contract, and it's been there for some time, and they probably got something from the city when they put that in. So you've got to be reasonable and say, listen, we negotiated this, it's in the contract, the city wants to increase paramedic units, and that's the way to do it.
They got minimum manning, didn't they?
There's minimum manning, yeah. And
Wasn't that the quid pro quo?
and I don't have that information, I'm sorry, but the bottom line is, it doesn't change manpower, we're still 72-person shift, every shift has 72 firefighters. It's just taking 4 firefighters from Engine 9, putting them in 2 paramedic units, and then the 4 people in Squad 2 are Engine 9.
Do they need them? I mean, isn't that 4 additional people on an engine that wasn't there before?
No, because remember, you don't have that squad anymore because it was consolidated into 1. So there'll be 4 people on Engine 9, 2 people in an emergency unit, and 1 person in the battalion chief's unit. So it's like, I mean, it's probably the heaviest personnel throughout the city, not counting a ladder truck. but this would have the most, because it's a battalion, so the battalion chief is the West Battalion, so he's there and also over at Engine 10. So it's an additional vehicle, but it's only one person in it.
How do you fight a fire with 4 people?
You typically don't. When there's a fire, it comes in as a structure fire. A structure fire it's about a 24-person response. So it's 4 engine companies, 1 fire truck ladder, a battalion chief, and a paramedic unit go to every structure fire. Now, if these people happen to be on medical calls, engines cross from different portions of the
If
city.
there's a fire in Engine 9's area, then they go, but other ones come too.
Sure. Every fire, every reported fire or smoke gets 4 fire engines, 1 ladder truck, a battalion chief, and a paramedic unit, if available.
And so none of what is being proposed here has any impact on the city's preparedness to fight fires. It's already a comprehensive effort. This is a data-driven plan to address the need for better medical response, because it's nearly 80% of the calls are medical calls.
If you take it, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it doesn't impact the city's preparedness in terms of fire safety.
Can you just,
We're actually almost going back to the way it was in 2000. This was like this in 2000, 4 emergency units, but they changed. They changed because there was a spike in alarms in 2000. And if you look at this document, if you look at the year 2000, you'll see that the fire incidents were 9,288. Now, if you look at the year before, 4,700, and the year after, 6,600, but they kept it the same. They did not change back, and it's never been changed back since. And if you look at the fire calls are dramatically down, especially the structure fires. If you look at the structure fires, very important number, in 1994 you had 287, in 2015 you had 76. And every year that structure fire number goes down because a lot of redevelopment, better technology, fire alarm systems, but again, we have not made the necessary changes to get more paramedics to the doorstep in the shortest period of time. Because if you don't have a paramedic, and again, the fire department always prepared for a structure fire, but when we have a cardiac arrest or a very serious medical call and you can't get a paramedic there quick enough, under this plan, this is the answer. 4 ambulances covered with paramedics. Definitely 3, very possibly 4. It splits the city up in demographic areas, and if these units are out and there's a medical call here, who's going to go? The engine's still going to go. It's based on how the call comes into 911. They're not going to say, well, we'll wait for the paramedic unit to come all the way over here. Absolutely not. That's where you get these numbers, 465, 643. They're still going to go on medical calls based on the need.
So 20 people have already been hired, is that right, as paramedics?
That's
And they're
correct.
in training right now.
They're not in training yet. It's scheduled to be October 1st, October 15th.
Okay, so that's budgeted, that's done.
But, right, those were fire department budgeted positions that they hired licensed paramedics, and then they'll train them as firefighters just as if we were bringing in a person from the street and training them as a firefighter. Same amount of time, the only thing they don't have to do is medically train them because they already have the training.
Right, okay.
So they're licensed paramedics.
Right, and I think the union president suggested, why don't you hire 40? Because then we would put paramedics, I guess, essentially in every engine. I don't know how that figures in the
Yeah,
changes, but
we have a hard enough maintaining what we have now and adding 20. And again, we don't know if we're going to get 20. We've hired 20, but they're going through the background checks. We might not get 20. But again, if you put them on the engine companies, you'd have to put them on every fire engine. Because if you only put them on a few fire engines, you'd be taking that company out of that district all the time to go on a medical call. And if the ambulance shows up and there's not a paramedic on it, you're taking the paramedic off that engine company, putting it in the back of the ambulance, going to the hospital, Now, that fire engine has to come out of service to go to the hospital. It doesn't make sense. We're trying to eliminate that. The residents want us to be efficient, they want us to be effective, and this plan offers effectiveness, and the highest level of emergency medical care at your doorstep in the shortest period of time. I mean, they're the numbers. These are facts. And we're not saying it, pounding our fist saying that, we have to have an engine company on every call, because we don't. We don't. A lot of medical calls these days, throughout the region, someone who's years ago, if you cut your finger and you called 911, red lights and siren, we're all going. It doesn't happen like that anymore, because they don't need to go red lights and siren to that with an engine company. It's the smaller stuff we can handle with a more versatile unit with 2 people on it. One, the highest level of care you can get in this state in a pre-hospital setting, and there's more of them. Engine companies don't give us that answer. Engine companies, where's our ambulances? We need the ambulances. Plus, we get revenue from it, okay? We get a revenue stream. We have an annual cost savings of $923,000 because we're not running engines on every call and beating them to death. Instead of lasting 12 and 15 years, they're lasting 9, 8, and 9, some 10 years, because as the further you get out of the city, they last a little bit longer because they don't have all these high numbers going on medical costs.
So if there's a shooting or a homicide in the city, does the engine go?
Yes. And will it go in the new plan? Yes. Because you might need some extra hands.
I see.
Yeah.
So is there a change in how, who's going to get sent to medical calls under the new plan? Because the union folks seem to think that the BLS response and the ALS response is going to change, and that fire engine people are going to be sitting at the firehouse and waiting and watching an ambulance go by, and they're not allowed to go to that call.
Again,
So they're closer and could get there faster.
understand what you're saying. It's based on the call being properly triaged and sending the appropriate unit. If they know that this engine's here and a paramedic unit is not here or not in this district, because again, they're very close, okay? And that's why they're done. This one sits way out in the East Shore. They would, in fact, not go if there was a paramedic unit right there, unless it was a high priority call. Then they both go.
So why would an engine go to a shooting call or possible homicide call?
Only because of the need for additional hands. At a shooting, especially it could be, it might just be one person, but a shooting is a very, because again, the paramedics will be doing all the advanced stuff, and that engine might be there helping out with the basic stuff. We call those penetrating trauma incidents. Today they get a paramedic unit and an engine. They'll get one here as well. I don't think there's a need to change that. And again, I think that's important because a lot of hands. That person could be in. Could be a trauma code 200. They could be having the bag. They could be doing CPR, but you still have to do all the advanced stuff, putting airways in, putting IVs in, running fluid. But again, those patients you want to kind of scoop up as quick as you can and get them to the hospital. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I think I understand the city's point of view in terms of a plan to bring more paramedics to city residents. But one of the issues that I do have, and just as a note in this document, many places where the union says engine 9 will be taken out of service, just to reiterate that. But aside from that,
I can reiterate that really easily.
Right.
Engine 9 is right here.
I know.
It's not going anywhere, okay? It might be covered, there might be 4 different people that are normally on it, but engine 9 is not going anywhere.
But one of the issues that the union brought up, and I was wondering if you could address that, they have, any criticisms of the deputy director of emergency management. We've been down that road. But I was wondering, can you tell us, just to get this question out there, under what authority does Rick Fontana, deputy director of emergency management, get to present this plan?
Again, based on my job description, I am part of a work group, a fire department work group that I've been a part of since the day I walked in the door here 8 years ago, as well as the New Haven Police Department had an oversight work group. I was a part of that as well. As part of the Department of Public Health, all of what you're seeing today with Narcan and overdoses, I work with them. It's again, it's part of what I do. It's an overall of public safety, preparedness, response, and recovery. It's listed in my job. It says that I'll analyze problems, I'll make recommendations, and implement changes. I think that's pretty clear, but...
So you work at the authority of the mayor, basically, to do this kind of work?
This initiative begins in the mayor's office. It is channeled through the chief administrative officer, who has oversight over the fire department, the police department, public works, and the rest. The chief administrative officer is Mike Carter. He is, in a technical sense, the director. That's why Rick is the deputy director. So you're absolutely right. This is a comprehensive effort that begins in the mayor's office, runs through the chief administrator's office, and has been administered by the deputy director, by Chief Wright, by Chief Black after that, and is about to be deployed.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question, Stu.
Sure.
Again, I think someone else brought this up about the difference between the ambulance and maybe the equipment that you're going to bring on for the paramedics. Could describe that. And 2 pieces, 4 pieces,
Yeah, so the paramedics have advanced life support equipment that entails, number one, it has what we call a life pack. A life pack is a very intricate piece of equipment. It does many things. It monitors oxygen and CO2 in the airway, so when we put a breathing tube down in your throat, paramedics are the only ones that can do that. It monitors that. We also look at a person's cardiac rhythm. So we look at their cardiac rhythm and say, okay, we identify a 3rd-degree heart block, and we need to administer 1 milligram of atropine. We now have the ability to do that because a paramedic is on scene. So we open the drug box, we administer 1 milligram of atropine, and we clear a heart block up with a person who has a blood pressure that they're not sustaining their functioning, and and a heart rate that could be deadly. So we have that equipment. Also have the ability to administer other cardiac medications, epinephrine. We have the ability to administer narcotics. We have the ability to administer Narcan through an IV. There are so many medications, non-cardiac and cardiac related, that a paramedic carries, along with the ability in that life pack, someone who's in cardiac arrest, we also have an external pacemaker. So we can actually pace your heart from the outside when you don't have a mechanical heartbeat. Those are things that you can't get in an everyday BLS engine.
And each paramedic unit has these?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, and there's going to be 4 of these.
Correct.
4 pieces of equipment that are carrying this with the personnel.
Correct.
With them. Okay. And
4 pieces.
4 pieces. And now the ambulance, how long ago was that? It was just 1 ambulance for the
So
city?
yes, actually, as part of this plan, we had the authority. We were given the authority to buy 2 new vehicles. So for the 2 new groups, so we've purchased those already, and we also have the authority to go out and do 2 more ambulances. So that money was just made available as well.
That would be 5, then, right?
Yeah, so you gotta have a backup though.
Oh.
And all of the ones that they were both using are they're really old. I will say that we had a unit that was involved in a motor vehicle accident, an ambulance, back in, again, I'm not sure the exact date, but it's been out of service for about 6 months as we negotiated with the insurance company of what they were gonna pay and what we were gonna pay. And once that vehicle is ready, we'll have another ambulance. Because again, these units do go down, and you've got to have a backup ready to put in its place, because if you don't, you can't just put those paramedics in a vehicle. They all have to be certified by the state. They have to be inspected, yearly inspection. They have to be inspected daily. It's a very articulate process with paramedic services within the fire department, and it's managed by an emergency medical services supervisor, who does a great job. We also get in the back of ambulances very often as a paramedic and go to the hospital, and then the emergency unit would follow them to the hospital. and then pick up that person. So when they say we're in and out of the hospital, yeah, we are, but we're providing advanced life support. When we get in the back of that ambulance, that means they don't have a paramedic and we do. So we're putting more paramedics. They're going to be quicker to the scene. It cannot be. It's for someone to say we're going to increase response times is ridiculous. It can't happen, because if this unit is not here, one of these paramedic units, the engine will go. And yes, there will be an engine in Engine 9.
What about the new squad car? Has that been purchased? Is that in the process?
No, so actually, well, we put in a grant for a new heavy-duty rescue, and typically when you look around, in most big cities, they usually have one of those. We have two, because again, whether it was that spike that caused the increase in decreasing paramedic units, we expect to have to either buy that or get it with a grant, but the squad here, Squad 1, needs to be replaced. So again, it would just be replacing it with a heavy-duty rescue, much more similar to what you see in New York City. You might see that in Hartford, Waterbury. Those are what you typically see doing those. And
There's only one squad, right?
There was two, yes.
Right.
So will the other two trucks serve as backups in case that?
Yes, and that's what they do all the time. When there's a piece of fire apparatus that is, even if you purchase a new one, that one becomes a backup, because with that many apparatus, they do go down. So you've got to have good backups that are ready to be shuffled into another position. Absolutely.
You can only get that if you get a grant. You don't have the money so far for the squad.
So
Heavy duty squad.
So correct. And again, when we proposed this initially, we said that we'll either get it through a grant or we'll purchase it. Because again, Squad 1 needs to be replaced, and they're close to $1 million. We buy fire apparatus every year, sometimes two, because they're really, they get pretty beat up when you're doing that amount of calls and running the city. We think this is a safer plan. Think about a smaller ambulance type vehicle going to a paramedic call instead of a big fire engine. Again, we read all the time about, fire apparatus in motor vehicle accidents and, firefighters being injured and people being killed all the time. Those big engines on racing down to a paramedic call they're dangerous. How many times you're driving and you see a big fire engine coming, if it hits somebody, it's not, the results aren't usually very good. The ambulances are a little different. We think the public is more safe with this plan.
Okay, so out of the 5, there's an ambulance already there, so total of 4 altogether, so you would have 5, because you would have a backup, right?
And that would be great, yeah, that's our anticipation.
Okay, and you said, when you were talking about 4, you said at least 3 would be ambulances as opposed to just a truck with equipment.
Right, well again, we purchased a brand new Suburban, which is almost ready to come into the fleet. And that's
That's not a transport though.
It's not a transport, but again, and those are a lot more cost effective, but it doesn't give us the ability to transport, especially when you're further away from the city. When you're in these locations further from the hospital and you don't get an ambulance, it creates a public safety nightmare for us. And we feel that this plan, as backed up by the fire chiefs and the assistant fire chief, makes the most sense from a cost-effective, efficiency, and delivering, which is probably the most important part, delivering the highest level of emergency medical care available in the state.
Okay, now you get reimbursed because you transport. Is that what?
We actually get reimbursed. We have a bundle billing program that we work together with American Medical Response. So when our paramedic gets in the back of an ambulance and provides advanced life support care, we actually receive revenue for that.
So you get revenue for that? Okay.
We get revenue from that. If we transport, we get revenue from that. And again, it's from the insurance companies. Somebody who has Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. It's not like you're billing the person, but again, these are ways that, we're being held to, be as cost effective as we can. People don't want to have their taxes go up, and the mayor's been very, very forthright and says, do what we can to have the highest level of public safety at the best possible cost for the residents.
Well, I have to say I'm very confused because I don't take ambulances and so forth, but Well, I don't understand, the ambulance comes and they don't have paramedics on it?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you.
Yeah.
So the ambulance system.
So, they just drive?
The EMTs.
They're emergency medical technicians, and they do have some basic oxygen and things like that, but no, they don't, they have a defibrillator, they could administer an EpiPen, but no, they, sometimes, in many cases, they don't have, we actually, our paramedics go in the back of an ambulance to the hospital on an average of 45 times a week. Figure that out a year. A lot.
How do they get back?
No, so
The fire department vehicle follows the ambulance.
we follow the ambulance.
The truck, the engines.
Well,
No, the-
Whatever.
So right now, it could be an engine,
Right.
because sometimes if you, like today, there was a call out in the Woodward Avenue area,
Mhm.
and that station, one of the firefighters got in the back of the ambulance to assist, so that engine goes to the hospital.
So that they can pick them up and then go to the next call if needed.
Correct. Because if they don't, then they're short, and all of a
Yeah,
sudden,
they can't respond.
well, they don't have a full crew.
Right.
I just never knew there was a difference between an EMT and a paramedic.
Yeah, and
Doesn't seem to make much sense to me.
No, it doesn't, that's the way, unfortunately, paramedics today are very difficult to come by, very difficult. AMR, our commercial transport agency, they do a great job for us, but unfortunately, they're having a very tough time getting paramedics, and guess what happens when we take 20 of them? We're taking probably 15 from them. So this is the first time we reached out to other parts of the state, other parts of the country for paramedics, and we'll train you. But come here, because the more we take from American Medical Response, it's kind of counterproductive,
Right.
because then their ambulances are coming without a paramedic.
So sometimes they do have a car. The ambulance sometimes will have.
Sure.
The AMR
In
people.
many cases, that ambulance has an EMT and a paramedic in it. Many cases, it has 2 EMTs.
But it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to have the nurse.
It doesn't have to have the paramedic.
Right, whereas the fire department set up now would have paramedics.
Right, and we're not willing, we put this out, we are not willing to go backward and not offer paramedics in the city of New Haven. Absolutely not. It's the highest level of care, and we have to continue to provide that service. This plan is actually going to be, not only is it cost effective, but it's also going to save the psychological component of the paramedics in this program, because these guys are just racing around the city like chickens with their heads cut off. And they do a great job. They're the busiest in the region. But 7,000 calls, and then you can come down here and do 297, you tell me where you want to work.
So they're gonna be trained as firefighters, but do they rotate and respond to fire calls as well, or are they only gonna work?
No, so and that's why the 20, if we have a total of 20, and we have the 2 additional units, what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to rotate. So instead of having 2 paramedics on a unit, it'll be 1 paramedic on the paramedic ambulance, and the other paramedic that might be sitting in there is working on an engine. So getting some experience to fight fires as well, because when you keep them here continually, when they walk in the door at night, they go out the door, they may not be coming back tonight. They might be coming back tomorrow morning, because they go from call to call to call, and they've got paperwork to do. It's a tough business, and no one, the fire service doesn't embrace paramedics like you would want them to. They really don't. I can speak from experience. I've been doing this I've been a fire department paramedic since 1978, actually 1979, and I will tell you, there should be a little bit more embracing, but again, remember what happens. They're the ones that are always moving, so the tones are always going off. They're the guys that are always going out the door. And sometimes from a psychological standpoint, it does create an effect where you burn those guys out. And our goal is we have some extra ones so we can do some rotations, and that makes for a more healthy medical system. I don't want to go too far down the road, but I can tell you we're looking at community-based paramedic programs. So instead of sending somebody to the hospital, our paramedic unit, we might have to get more. Our paramedic unit will be out in the field working with people so they don't have to go to the hospital, so they don't, so again, taking someone to the hospital, surges the hospital to the point where the only people that are getting in are the life-threatening stuff, everybody else is in the waiting room. So when you call 911 with a basic fall victim, you don't have to get all that red lights and siren. If somebody fell and they say, listen, I fell, I'm not injured, I need a hand getting up, we send a fire truck, red lights and siren. Okay? Nobody else does that in the region. It's dangerous. But again, we have to get more in tune to the best practices that we're all seeing. And it's not just here in New Haven, it's not just in the state of Connecticut. This is a national trend. And the more paramedic units we have, the better we'll be. And we might need to, and this might be a pilot program to say, listen, we might need to go further. And that's going to be our goal, 75%. And they're not going down.
So you said, so the other towns don't send engines. Well, they have
The other towns do not send engines, and again, they run our system just like we do. It's based on how the call comes in. If the call comes in as an unconscious person, I'll use West Haven as an example, unconscious person, you get an engine and you get a rescue truck with paramedics on it, only because you need hands. You're setting up a thumper to do CPR, you're breathing for the patient, you're pushing medications, and you need more hands. So yes.
I know we have to wrap up,
Yeah,
but I just want, one of the things that was thrown out when we talked to the union guys is you responding to fire calls. So I just wanted to hear your side of
Sure.
when you decide to go to scenes and why.
I respond on structure fires that are a multiple alarm fire. As from a coordination standpoint, I'm the one who handles the people that get burned out of their houses. So again, I'm usually the guy who's coming a little bit after. So that's, and again.
And you hear those because you have a scanner or,
Oh, no, I get this.
Oh, you get the chance.
Absolutely, yep.
So, but you don't get called in by the fire department or something, you decide which calls you go to when you think they're gonna need help at the scene?
Again, it's all based on part of my job responsibilities, and I get dispatched out on working structure fires, as well as on multiple alarm fires or major incidents, could be hazardous materials. And again, my interaction is more of a behind-the-scenes interaction. End of story.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you
Very
for the
much.
opportunity.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, it takes a long time, but we could have really given you